Hello and welcome back to the Nature Garden Podcast with me, Carl Steinson, and the weekending show team from Lionheart Radio. Come along with us as we take a bonny wee wander down the garden path and country lane with the birds and the bees and the flowers and trees, and it's a chance to hear some great music and Northumbrian stories. On today's show, as we say farewell to September, Tom Pattinson's reflecting on a patchy but canny spring, summer, of flowers and crops, and the joys of soft and top fruits, and he's growing tetties for Christmas. Tom Cadwallender's full of good news about the breeding season, and he's following migrations and keeping tabs on crossbills. And we'll be looking at the results of this year's big butterfly count. Dr. Zoe Randle from Butterfly Conservation is here to tell us more, plus some top tips for the garden from Tom P. All coming up on the Nature Garden Podcast. Hello, and a very merry autumn to you. Tom Pattinson's a busy chap at the best of times, but he's taking time this week to reflect on the ups and downs of the spring sowing and summertime growing. Hello, Tom. How's it going?
Hi, Carl. It's good to be back on air after that nice summer break we've had. I've been busy in the garden, of course, and there's lots to talk about. It just happens to coincide with the end of the main growing season. So I think a little reflection first of all. Some people I've been meeting recently, I do meet a lot of gardeners, and give me their thoughts. Some have complained about poor crops here and there, but the majority have soldiered on, and the flower show benches do not lie. When I've gone round judging in recent times, some superb vegetables, fruit and flowers. We do moan a bit, don't we? Overall, we started off with a cold beginning to the year. Difficult to get some early vegetables planted out. They wouldn't have made much progress anyway. But as tradition demands, on Good Friday over Easter weekend, I planted my potatoes. Charlotte, supposed to be a second early potato, but in my book and it actually happens this way in our garden. It even beats foremost, which is supposed to be a first early potato. It's a good one, Charlotte. Salad potato, very tasty. Anyway, I planted them out a little deeper than usual, even though they had shoots on, and this emerged about after a month, which is a while actually. Some springs are up in about 2 or 3 weeks to the surface. Main thing is, they're ready for digging the 3rd week in June, which hereabouts, Newcastle area anyway, it's race week, the hirings, the shows on the town moor and all that. Oh gosh, you can't speak to your fellow gardeners if you hadn't houked your tetties or dug your first early potatoes 3rd week in June. Potatoes, they weren't the top of it though. We've had some decent crops here, despite the dry period that followed. No, it wasn't necessarily hot, scorching hot during the summer, cooler some days, but there was a dryness, not so much rain. I had to get the watering can out. But the other vegetable did very well. The garden peas, the garden beans, runner beans. They grew slowly, but we got there. And at first they were just having those flowers, the scarlet flowers. And then I sprayed them a bit. because they can get quite dry, actually, the flowers, and they don't set easily when it's like that. It's an old gardening trick. Get a hand spray out, just ordinary water, spray over them, and the little beans started to perform. We had some lovely runner beans, and they kept growing on. The onions did well too. The Kelsey onions, bought in as young plants, didn't sow the seed this year, just bought some young plants in, and they grew well. They're now dried off, and they're in storage in the garage, where it's cold, quite cool, without frost, of course, and dark as well. They're quite happy there. They will see us through the winter period. Biggest pleasure of all came from the corn on the cob. Put it out about the end of May, middle of May, say. Yeah, middle to the end of May, because it was so cold. And as you know, the corn on the cob, or sweet corn, loves to have some warmth. Well, this was one of the early varieties, Sundance, and it grew beautifully, but slowly. Plants get up to about just over 60 centimetres, say 70 metres tall, and then no cobs forming. They came in a rush near the end, and instead of eating them or having them to eat about the middle of August, we had to wait until September. And here we are on the verge of, or just starting October, and we're still picking them. The trick is, because they're wind pollinated, you don't plant them in rows, you plant them in a block. And my block was 5 plants by 4 plants. Now, you'll get 2 good cobs from every plant, so we're talking about 5 by 4, 20, and you double that for the number of cobs on the plant. 20 plants, 40 cobs, some eating there. Boil them lightly or steam them, a knob of butter on them. Oh, what a tremendous starter they are for an evening meal. And we're eating them at the moment. That's a bit for a catch-up on my vegetables this year, or the majority of them. After the next one, I'll say something about the fruit. That's exciting too.
I'm Tom Heap from Countryfile, and you're listening to the Nature Garden podcast.
It's been a bit of a strange summer, weather-wise, but it's sad to see it go, although autumn brings with it some delights. Lord Tom Cadwallender's here with some good news on terns and kittiwakes. Yes, things seem to be up on the Northumberland coast. Welcome back, Tom.
Hello. It's great being back in the podcasting harness, if you like. And it's great being back with the lads and great recording things. But the thing is, we're at the back end of September here, and the summer's gone. The last time we met was middle of July, and so much has happened. You know, I'm engaged in breeding seabird census work on a nearby island, Coquet Island, the RSPB Coquet Island, and it's been quite fascinating. And but that just seems to have slipped through the fingers. But just to report back, it's been quite an interesting breeding season, because you know the last 2 summers, the 2 summers of 22 and 23 we were hit quite badly by bird flu, that highly pathogenic avian influenza, as to give it its full title, and it was really devastating. And this year we weren't really sure what was going to happen, what it was going to look like, even, you know, how many birds were going to be and what sort of condition are they going to be in. But it was quite encouraging, because when we got on the island, we discovered that the bird numbers was down, as you would expect, because we'd lost quite a number of breeding birds, particularly the terns. So it's, but actually it was quite encouraging to see some of the productivity, because there was so much fish in the sea, so much food being brought in. Productivity was at a record high. Whilst the numbers of the birds that I particularly work on, the roseate tern, which is the rarest breeding seabird in the UK, the last time we had a proper count, which is a couple of years ago, because of bird flu. We had 150 pairs, which was a post-1970s record. And we lost quite a number, so we weren't sure really what to expect, because we'd found loads of dead young ones and some adults as well. But actually this year we ended up with something like 126, 27 pairs, which is quite remarkable really. But the big story is the productivity. Normally productivity would be 0.8, 0.9 per of a chick per pair, and that sounds very odd to say, 0.9. What is that? But really, when you're working averages out, that kind of works what it is. But this year we ended up with 1.4, so it's almost a half a chick more in per pair than what we kind of used to. So it's almost a direct response to the fewer birds around, but as a response to the amount of food around. What generally happens with birds is that if the more food there's available, the higher the productivity, the more chicks that are raised and fledged. And that is exactly what's happened. And wasn't just in with the roseate terns, other terns that were there, the sandwich terns, the common terns and the Arctic terns, whilst the numbers of pairs were down, the productivity was up. And indeed the same thing with the kittiwakes. It was so encouraging. There's been so much food being brought in. It just boded well. It was just a wonderful kind of situation. And the chicks were all healthy and lots of these birds, and they all got off and they all fledged and they're all heading out to where they should be. The kittiwakes are now in the North Sea or heading north, and they'll be in the North Atlantic shortly. And the terns will be heading their way south into Africa for the winter. Puffins will be out into the North Sea, soon to be heading out into the North Atlantic to spend their winter. Can you imagine being in the North Atlantic during during the winter period? Gosh, they're tough as old boots, those guys. Oh, goodness me, they are. But the good news is we've had a good breeding season, and it's all well. So I'm really quite encouraged. So that's kind of reporting in on the back of the summer, if you like. And now we're into, as I've said, well into the September, almost at the back of September, where autumn migration is in full flow, which is absolutely wonderful. We've seen a lot of the wading birds coming through. We've seen some of the knot, also known as red knot, which are wading birds, and they breed up in the very, 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 very high Arctic, and they're about sort of 6 inches tall, grey and winter plumage, and the young ones are grey. But actually the breeding season birds are red, hence the name, the red knot. And these birds have come an awful long way. And these ones have passed through. Some of them will hang around here on the Northumberland coast, and they'll spend their winter here. But lots of others will actually go down into the tip of South Africa. I've been into South Africa in the autumn, in August in fact. It's a number of years ago now. But we were seeing red knot there in the tip of South Africa at the end of August. So they travel all that way in such a short period of time. But anyway, the high Arctic's been emptying, so we've seen quite big numbers of these wading birds coming through. One of the kind of the concerns of the wading birds when they started to return, normally the first birds will come in the end of July into August. And that's fair enough. That's what we see, a lot of the failed breeders. But actually we saw a lot of these high Arctic breeding wading birds early, worryingly early. And that suggests to me that they've had quite a poor breeding season, because there's nothing to hang around for. If they've failed, they'll clear out pretty early. And I think that's the case for a lot of ground nesting birds. And from the UK right up into the high Arctic. It's just been so wet, it's been cold. This summer has just been so bad right through into the high latitudes, and it's been quite a concern. So we'll just have to wait and see what the score is on that front. But it didn't bode well. But we're seeing sort of decent numbers of birds, and We're seeing the wildfowl now starting to build up. I did a Webb's count, the Wetland Bird Survey count just last weekend, and I got up to sort of 80 odd widgeon, and must be about almost 100 teal. Now these birds are coming down from likes of Northern Europe, Siberia, to winter in the UK. Can you imagine what it's like up in those northern climates if they're coming here to winter? But anyway, they're getting here, and the plumages are really fabulous because they're coming in their eclipse, what is known as their eclipse plumage. And it's that in-betweeny plumage where they molt out of their summer finery, which is worn out because they've just had almost a full year of it. And it's the in-between plumage when they're flightless and they have this kind of cryptic plumage, but actually sometimes it's quite attractive. But it's before they start to molt at the back end of the year into their fine plumage in the beginning of the new year, ready to head north again. So they're coming in there, this eclipse plumage, which is absolutely lovely. And the birds are coming in, as I said, we've got 80 odd widgeon and about 100 teal, and they're coming through, and the numbers will get up to 600 to 700 of each at the peak of the winter. So they're now coming in. So yes, signs of winter are here. And what I have been seeing in the last sort of week or so is the big numbers of pink-footed geese heading south, and these birds are coming down from Greenland particularly, and Iceland, and a lot of them are going to spend time in Northumberland, but a majority of them are going to be going down into the into Norfolk, in kind of around the Holcombe area, and tens of thousands of them will be down there. And that's the birds that are just coming down the east coast. There are other birds going to go down the west coast and they'll winter in the on the Dee estuary and places around there. So yes, it's all happening. Birds never stop. We glimpse into their lives really when I stand at my little watch point on the Aln estuary, and I'm glimpsing into their fascinating lives, their wonderful migration that they undertake. And really, it's quite a privilege. They just get on with their lives, regardless about what the human race is about, and they'll just do their business. But great folks, I'm really pleased to be back, trying to share some of my kind of passion for birds and wildlife generally, with passion, but for birds in particular. That's my really big bag. And hopefully, over the next few months, I'll be able to chat to you about a few other things that I'm seeing on a regular basis, but it's good to be back. Canny folks, I'll see you soon.
Now, fruit is one of the joys of the kitchen, and puddings and snacks and packed lunches and, well, everything. Tom's got some great ideas for growing your own.
I simply love growing fruit. That's soft fruits and top fruits. Soft fruits such as strawberries, raspberries and the currants, etc. And top fruits such as the plums, the apples, pears. You don't need necessarily a massive garden. Our garden is 1/4 acre. In that we grow lots of vegetables, lots of fruits and lots of flowering plants, ornamentals. So I can't devote it all to fruit. So there's a way around that. You go for plants on dwarf rootstock, grafted onto dwarfing rootstocks. M27 rootstock will give you a dwarf apple. So it's in theory and in practice, it's possible to have a mini orchard on your patio, even if you haven't got a big garden. So how does mine start off? Well, fruits demand moisture. To swell, they mainly contain water. So we've got to have moisture in the soil, which means mulching in late October, November, autumn, into winter time. Get the mulch on, and in the summer it retains moisture and helps retain moisture in the soil. And if there's a dry spell, that may just save the day. Watering comes as well, of course. I have a sort of timetable in my head, which I think in terms of producing fruit during the year. And it starts off for me in January, when I go into the bed outside in the garden, the strawberry bed that is, and dig up one or two plants, decent plants, which are not looking very tall at that particular time, and I put them into pots, stand them on the bench in the unheated greenhouse, and in that relative calm, away from the wind, the rain, and the worst of the frost, they start to develop. And this gives me, by the time we get to late May, early June, I've got some fruits which have developed in the relative warmth, I would say, of the unheated greenhouse. And then, of course, later in June, the outdoor crop start to fruit, quite often before they start the Wimbledon fortnight in June. I'm pollinating the peach, the peregrine peach, which is also in the unheated greenhouse, in February. It's self-pollinated, as most of the fruits I grow are, but it doesn't do any harm with this peach. Had lovely pink flowers in February, which are quite attractive in their own right when the plant has no leaves on at all. I go around with a watercolor brush, tiny brush, and I help transfer the pollen grains from the stamens of the flower to the pistil. So I'm helping, even though it's self-pollinating. It will fruit. The fruits are ready to eat and lovely. If you thin them out, you get bigger fruits, fewer fruits, but bigger ones. They're ready to eat by mid-July. During June, before that, the outdoor strawberries are ripening. The peaches start to ripen about July. So I'm eating ripe peaches in July from an unheated greenhouse. That's quite remarkable, I think, for North Northumberland, where it's not the hottest place on the earth. The most beautiful, perhaps, but not the hottest. August, Victoria plums are ready. They are grown on the pixie rootstock. The plant is Victoria, and there it doesn't appear to be much of a crop when you look at it, but most of them are hidden in the leaves. Once you start picking, my goodness, what a crop this year. And of course, as with all the fruits, the soft fruits and the top fruits, any surplus straight into a bag and into the freezer, or start making jam or preserves with them. But you never waste any of it. By the time we get to August, the black currants and red currants are ready, and of course the raspberries have already started fruiting. So, and they continue. So all that gorgeous fruit is at your hands. August brings the early apples. The first one to ripen around this neck of the woods is Discovery, a lovely dessert apple. It's followed by James Grieve in October, another lovely dessert apple. And so on. The apples continue from there on. If you're growing blueberries, remember, they need an acid soil. They love an acid soil. But if you're continually putting, say, well-rotted horse manure or cow manure or organic material in there, it tends to keep the soil acidic anyway. Wow, so much scope for growing fruit. You really must give it a try.
The inclement weather has been challenging to us all, and also to our flora and fauna. I was trying to count butterflies during the recent big butterfly count, and found just one cabbage white, oh dear. So, how are our butterflies faring? Here's Dr. Zoe Randle, Senior Surveys Officer from Butterfly Conservation, to tell us more. Hello, Zoe.
Hello, Carl. The results of Butterfly Conservation's Big Butterfly Count 2024 are in, and almost 86,000 people took part by submitting over 143,000 counts. The valuable data collected by participants of the Big Butterfly Count have revealed that butterflies had a poor summer. Overall, participants spotted just 7 butterflies on average per 15-minute count, a reduction of almost 50% on last year's average of 12. And this is the lowest in the 14-year history of the Big Butterfly Count. It was the worst summer in the count history for common blue, holly blue, green-veined white, small tortoiseshell, painted lady and Scotch argus. and the majority of species showed declines in the number seen this year compared with 2023. The wet spring and cold summer delayed the emergence of butterflies and hampered their activity to feed, fly, find mates and lay eggs. Butterflies are cold-blooded insects and they need the warmth and sunshine to thrive. Although this year's poor butterfly numbers can be attributed to poor weather, it comes against a backdrop of long-term butterfly trends which show that 80% of our butterflies have declined since the 1970s. Butterflies are able to cope with the vagaries of the UK weather. However, falling populations are less resilient to these vagaries and extreme weather events. So what can we do to help our butterflies in the longer term? Well, the biggest drivers of butterfly population trends are land management, habitat loss and climate change. The use of pesticides is also affecting butterflies. Establishing a wild space, which is somewhere for butterflies and moths to feed, breed and shelter, is a great way to help butterflies and moths. You can do this even if you don't have a garden. For example, if you have a balcony, you could have some pots and some planters on it with lots of different flowers growing. Check out the wildspaces.co.uk website for more information. Other simple things you can do are leaving long areas of grass in your garden. This will help to boost butterfly abundance. You can also leave the leaves. Many species of butterfly and moth overwinter as eggs, caterpillars or chrysalises in fallen leaves. And please don't use pesticides. If you grow a variety of nectar plants that grow throughout the season, this can provide food for adult butterflies throughout the year. And flowering ivy is great for providing nectar late in the season. Growing caterpillar food plants is another good way to help butterflies and moths. You can also support the work of butterfly conservation in many other ways. You can submit sightings of butterflies and moths to our schemes. You could volunteer for butterfly conservation. You could join butterfly conservation as a member. You could donate to our funds and establish a wild space. We'd like to thank everyone who took part in Butterfly Conservation's Big Butterfly Count this year. Your data is absolutely valuable to us and we couldn't do what we do without it. And please do take part in next year's Big Butterfly Count. Thank you.
Crossbills are enigmatic birds with a unique look, and Tom Cadwallender's looking out for them and keeping a log in the cones and conifers of Northumberland.
Some of you may know that I work as a freelance ornithologist, an ornithological surveyor, bird surveyor, and it's not a bad way of earning a living really. And over the times I've surveyed sort of quite a number of quite interesting species and different habitats and so forth. But last week I was asked to go and check a piece of woodland for crossbills, and this is the first time I've carried out this sort of survey, but it's quite an interesting one because crossbills basically are just large finches, and the females are green generally and the males are really quite bright red generally, and they're quite sort of distinctive, and they feed almost entirely on the seeds out of cones which they manage to extract by their crossed bills. The bills are quite big on these birds. The birds themselves are got 5.5 inches, that sort of size, and the bills are quite big. But as the name suggests, they're crossed, and it's quite funny actually because the bills are crossed so they can extract the seeds out of the conifer cones, if you like, and sometimes they're crossed on the left and sometimes their bills are crossed on the right. Fascinating, really. But yeah, the reason for my survey was to go into this bit of woodland, and it was a precursor to a felling license. It was a commercial woodland, so really they still needed a license to do it, and because crossbills are a Schedule 1 breeding species, which means they're quite uncommon, we needed special permits to go and to fell the trees. But the different thing is that cones, which is the favoured diet of the crossbill, can occur right throughout the year, and as a consequence, crossbills can be found breeding throughout the year. And it's, yes, every month of the year they can be found breeding, which kind of causes a little bit of confusion. So my job was to go and sort of see if any birds were in this piece of woodland. As it happens, I found one juvenile, which was a fledged bird, but there weren't any adults around, and there weren't any cones in this bit of plantation, so it would be safe to fell. But, the interesting thing about them is that they will breed throughout the year. And I remember going out and doing surveys, not on crossbills, but actually in other areas, which have a kind of a backdrop of cones, and hearing crossbills singing in December, in January. So they're actually getting organised to breed it in those times, even though there was snow in the ground and there was icy patches forming. The crossbills were ready to breed. It's quite an interesting sort of group of birds, because there are 4 species in the family of crossbills. First is the largest is the parrot crossbill, which breeds and is found really quite a long way north in Scandinavia, and that's got a much bigger bill, as the name suggests, parrot crossbill. Again, the males are red and the females are green. And then the next one is the 2-barred crossbill, and they're quite distinctive because they're smaller than the parrot crossbills, the parrots, but they have 2 white wing bars, and they're quite special. And then there is the Scottish crossbill, which has relatively recently been identified as a separate species, perhaps in the last 20 odd years. But they're quite hard to separate from the common crossbill, which is the one that we have in generally across in the UK. The thing about these crossbills, though, the 2-barred and common crossbills can have kind of population eruptions, and we do see quite big numbers. If there's a huge cone crop, for example, the birds will actually exploit this resource, and we can find flocks of 20s, 30s, perhaps even up to 100 in particular areas, which are kind of there to exploit the cone crop. And occasionally some of the rarer ones, like the ones from further north, like 2-bards and parrots, are mixed in amongst them. And these are really quite rare species, and gosh, they're quite hard to identify, some of them. But the most difficult one to separate is the Scottish crossbill. But the differences are incredibly subtle, because it's mainly about the song they have, and quite amazing. But yes, so common crossbill is a relatively regular bird that we see in the upland plantations, conifer plantations, and again it's relating to the cone crop. But the Scottish crossbill was, until relatively recently, the only endemic species to the UK, and only to be superseded now by the red grouse that we have breeding in the UK. But it was thought originally to be a subspecies of the willow grouse, which is found in Scandinavia. But now that has been split, as the taxonomists say. So red grouse is now a fully fledged species as opposed to a subspecies. So now we have 2 endemic species in the UK, which is quite fascinating, really, from an ornithological point of view. But yes, crossbills, can be completely overlooked. And if you're listening to them, a lot of bird watchers, a lot of ornithologists will pick up birds by the noise they make, and they have quite a house sparrow-like call, so you can easily miss them. But actually, if you see a male crossbill, you ain't going to confuse that with anything. They're like a beacon. They're absolutely wonderful birds. So yes, being a freelance ornithologist has its interests, it has its really quite some good things going on. So yes, that's me this past week. So crossbills are a species to think about. Okay, folks, see you later. Bye.
And so, to the sound of War Blackbird, here's Tom with some things to be getting on with in the garden.
Well, it's jobs for the week time, and here are some of the jobs I'll be tackling in my garden during the coming days. I'm beginning by going into the mixed border, ornamental borders, and cutting down any of the dead herbaceous material that's not going to look attractive during the winter. There are quite a few plants, poppy seed heads, the fuller's teasel, things like that. You may wish to keep the heads because they look very effective when there's frost on them, shine throughout the border. Otherwise, chop things down to the base and let you get a good clear look at the border, see what needs to be done in terms of weeding and mulching later. That's something to get on with. The operation of salvaging anything that's not quite tender. If it's too big to move, then it can be, if it needs frost protection, it can be protected in situ where it is. If it's movable and you can bring it indoors, if you have a cold frame or an unheated greenhouse, give it protection during the winter period. This is the time to do it, between now, October, and before the large frosts arrive. I'm going to give the hedges a last trim. I have a beech hedge which is a little bit ragged. It was trimmed in August, but just a bit ragged. One or two little edges to cut off there. Privet, of course, it's grown a bit since it was done in July this year. And don't forget, those hedges, you shouldn't be trimming them about March, April, early part of May at least next year, because birds are nesting in there. I try to keep away from that. So this is the last chance to trim them, keep them smart into winter and into the early part of spring. Any main crop potatoes you've got in the garden, get them out, get them dried and get them stored, because the longer you leave them in, there are slugs, there's a keeled slug especially, which buries into them, and you store one potato in a storage tub with the others, it can set a rot off within there. You don't want any of that, so get the potatoes out as much as possible. If you've got some chrysanthemums growing outdoors, which I have, some of my early ones, and some of the autumn type, and they've got decent flower buds on them, you can leave them there, of course, at the risk of the weather damaging them. Or if you can lift them up with a ball of root around the soil, transfer them to a large pot, or as I do, I'll be transferring them into the greenhouse border, because the tomatoes have been moved from that now, and they'll flower for you all the way through October, November anyway, and with a bit of luck you can have them up to Christmas time. Flowering chrysanthemums, just think about that. I'm looking at the Christmas potatoes. I just mentioned potatoes, getting the ones out of the soil that remain there, main crop now, but it's the last call for planting potatoes, second cropping type, like Charlotte, the one I use for early work in the garden. Put those into a pot in an unheated greenhouse or a polytunnel, or into the soil there, and they're only about 10 weeks growing time. Well, I'm just going to plant a second batch in large pots, leave them in the unheated greenhouse, and they'll have 10 weeks of growing time up to Christmas. 8 would probably do it, but I leave them 10 weeks growing time, and we'll have fresh potatoes for the table of a Christmas. Do this every year, and I do, and it's a straightforward process, and it's pleasant to have that little surprise at Christmas time. It's I'm looking at the tall growths on some of the shrubs in the garden as well. Things like the budlegia, a butterfly bush, going into winter, if it's tall like that, high winds will rock it back and forth. I'm reducing the wind damage by chopping it in half at the moment, and the decisive prune, the final prune, will come just at the point of spring, when I chop it down to about 30 centimetres or so, if possible, to give it, because it puts on a lot of growth quickly, and it doesn't do it any harm at all. I'm doing that. If you have some roses with great long tall growths on them, avoid windrock and loosening the roots by not necessarily cutting them in half, pruning the long stems in half, festooning them, tying them over in a loop and back on themselves. Put a cane in to tie them to if necessary, and they will flower along the loop next year. I'm also looking at the apples at the moment. I'm storing them. Got a rack storage in the garage with tray after tray after tray, sort of a steeple of them, and I'm making sure that they're firm, the ones that are going in there. I've got some still on the tree yet, but as they ripen, they'll go in there. Such a lot to do, but whatever you're doing, enjoy your gardening.
You've been listening to Gardener Tom Pattinson, Birder Tom Cadwallender from the British Trust for Ornithology, and Dr. Zoe Randle from Butterfly Conservation. Don't forget, you can listen back to all of our previous programmes via the Nature Garden podcast. I'm Carl Steinson, thanks for listening, and enjoy your gardening and time outdoors with nature. Bye for now.